I am not a historian, but neither are you. So, how about we the people learn this stuff together? Welcome to US 101. And for God's sake, people, just wear a mask. Wear a mask. And wear it over your nose as well. So let's talk about it. I'm sorry. Ooh, I'm inside. I can take the mask off and I'm not going to breathe on you. Anyway, let's talk about it, y'all. Cancel culture. Those two words are now buzzwords that have polarized and divided the nation, as apparently all things do these days. Even the president was talking about cancel culture recently.
Cancel culture, driving people from their jobs, shaming dissenters, and demanding total submission from anyone who disagrees.
Shaming dissenters, you say, Mr. President? That's funny, because I know that millions upon millions of Americans shame you every day, and yet you're still here. You're still here. So you guys know what cancel culture is, right? It's basically a public takedown of an individual or a movement. You've seen it happening recently with Confederate monuments and Confederate statues. Also happened to individuals like Harvey Weinstein, a movie producer who used his power and influence to basically force women into having sex with him, and in some cases he would just go ahead and rape them. And usually you'll see the canceling of a person or a movement begin on social media. On social media, a campaign will be drummed up to basically publicly shame, humiliate, and embarrass said individual or said thing or said movement to the point that it basically just disappears from public view out of shame. And naturally, as all things are now, cancel culture has become political. More often than not, those on the right of the political spectrum tend to view cancel culture and political correctness for that matter as a bit too extreme these days, and they see it as a danger to the lives of American people because they feel that Americans will only be now judged moving forward for their past sins. Case in point, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh was protected by many on the right after he was accused of sexually assaulting Dr. Christine Blasey Ford when they were teenagers. Moreover, they claimed that his past sins weren't completely proven and that the accusations were baseless and that the actions of Kavanaugh as a young man shouldn't hold sway over his actions as an adult. Meanwhile, those that more often than not fall on the left side of the political spectrum believe that it is a good thing to hold people's feet to their fire and to hold them accountable for their past sins, because if there are certain people that are trying to obtain certain positions, either within government or just in public life, it's good to make sure that the people that are holding those positions are good people. I mean, nobody's perfect, but you don't want people that have committed horrific things in their past life to go on to be rewarded with a position of power. Case in point, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh was excoriated by many on the left following the testimony of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, not only for his actions towards a teenage girl, but also because his sitting on the bench of the court, despite being accused of sexual assault, taints the court itself, as well as the potential decisions he might make regarding women's rights. So in thinking about cancel culture, it got me also thinking about a phrase that was used more back in the day than it is now, to basically describe the same thing. If you said that you tarred and feathered someone, that basically means that you gave them a public dressing down. You publicly humiliated someone so badly that the person that was tarred and feathered pretty much refuses to show their face in public anymore because of the fear of what people will think of them. And why was this particular phrase, tarred and feathered, used to describe someone who had been publicly humiliated? Well, because back in the day, the actual act of tar and feathering someone was meant to do just that. Humiliate, shame, and embarrass someone to the point that they refuse to ever show their face in public again, or if they do show their face in public, their reputation is now stained and tarnished. Which makes sense, considering that, like their reputation, their skin would also be stained with the amount of tar that was rubbed on them, as well as the feathers that were clinging to their skin, all while they were being mocked and laughed at publicly. If you want, we can go ahead and consider tar and feathering as colonial cancel culture. Let's dive into this, shall we? So tarring and feathering actually has a history that dates way back. I'm talking like way back, before even the United States was a thought in anyone's head. In fact, it's said that tar and feathering began with Richard the Lionhearted, aka King Richard, you know, the good king from the Robin Hood stories. The first documented mention of tarring and feathering happens in 1189, when Richard over here makes a proclamation as to what would happen to thieves that decide to steal from his seafaring vessels. Richard proclaimed, quote, "He shall be first shaved, then boiling pitch shall be poured upon his head, and a cushion of feathers shook over it, so that he may be publicly known. And at the first land where the ships put in, he shall be cast on shore." I have no idea if that's what King Richard sounds like, but moving forward, if you ever hear the name King Richard, that's probably the voice that's going to appear in your head. You're welcome. Also, in that proclamation, when Richard uses the term pitch, that actually refers to a resin that becomes incredibly sticky when it's heated. See, that's another thing you guys should actually know about tarring and feathering. The tar that was used to tar and feather people back in the day, it wasn't like the super hot, black, sticky, oil, petroleum-based tar that you see used on roadways or when people are doing work on the roofs. What they were actually using was pine tar or wood tar, which came from pine trees and was originally first used to help seal the wood that was being used when ships were being built in ancient Greece. Matter of fact, ever wonder why the North Carolina mascot is a North Carolina Tar Heel? It's because there are a lot of pine trees in North Carolina, and pine tar became a major industry in the state at one point. Moreover, pine tar doesn't have to be super hot to get it to that melty, sticky point. It's said that if you melt it to around 140 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when pine tar starts to get sticky. Which means that, yes, it's far from comfortable having this stuff slathered all over your skin and then having feathers thrown on top of it and that sticking to your skin as well. Because remember, you have to take the stuff off of your skin, which means you're scraping and you're scrubbing and you're peeling, which means you're probably removing skin, thus leading to bleeding, leading to infection, leading to a lot of discomfort. And remember, there's no antibiotics back in the day, so you're probably not going to heal very quickly. So yes, it is very uncomfortable, but it's not at the point of like where it's lethal. So as time goes on, the act of tarring and feathering people as punishment becomes much more well known. In fact, it becomes very heavily associated with naval forces, since pine tar and wood tar are readily available on ships and in shipyards. And since sailing is the main form of international travel back in the day, so too the punishment sails with it. And eventually the punishment makes its way to the British American colonies. And our first instance of tarring and feathering in the colonies occurs in 1766 to a Captain William Smith. The story goes that a merchant in Norfolk, Virginia, named John Gilchrist, gets upset at Captain William Smith because William Smith has accused him of being a smuggler and reporting him as a smuggler to British authorities. Not wanting an insult like that to go unchecked, Gilchrist, along with 7 other men, including the mayor of Norfolk, Virginia, find William Smith and decide to punish him. According to Smith, Gilchrist and the mob, quote, "bedaubed my body and face all over with tar, and afterwards threw feathers upon me." And then following that, the men put Smith on a cart and, quote, "carted me through every street in the town," end quote, while he was being pelted with rotten eggs and stones. And as if that wasn't bad enough, after he's tarred and feathered, carted through the streets, hit with rotten eggs and stones, the men take him off a cart and they throw him into the sea. And in fact, he almost drowns, if not for a passing ship that comes by and it actually rescues him from the water. So I'm pretty sure William Smith, after that little incident, never accused anyone of smuggling, or I'm pretty sure anything again. And by 1770, we have 13 documented cases of tar and featherings happening in different parts of the colonies. And more often than not, these tarring and featherings are happening to men that are trying to bust up smuggling operations and also trying to enforce the Townshend Acts. Now, if you recall from your earlier lessons, the Townshend Acts were a tax that were passed down by King George in 1767 on the colonies, and they were taxes that were levied against the following items: glass, lead, paper, paint, and tea. And it's these acts, like the Townshend Acts, that brought some colonists, like John Hancock, to go ahead and start smuggling in some of these items from other parts of the world because it was much cheaper for them to do so. So basically, any man that tried to stop any type of smuggling and tried to enforce the Townshend Acts, which are not looked upon favorably by the colonists, would be tarred and feathered by the people. And since the Townshend duties were repealed in 1770, tarring and feathering is seen not only as a punishment, but it's also seen as an act of defiance by the colonists against British policy, British law, British Parliament, and the king himself. In fact, guys, one of the most famous images of the Revolutionary era, it's an image that you might have seen in your U.S. history textbooks, is this one right here. It's called Bostonians Paying the Excise Man, or tarring and feathering. This image right here depicts colonists tarring and feathering a customs agent while pouring tea into his mouth. And if you see in the background, a noose is hanging off of a liberty tree. And the man that was depicted in that tarring and feathering picture goes by the name of John Malcolm. Malcolm, in January of 1774, struck a shoemaker named George Robert Twelves Hughes with his cane that had a metal tip. And when Bostonians found out that a shoemaker had been struck by a British customs agent, they weren't taking too kindly to that news. Later that evening, they go to Malcolm's home, they barge in, they drag him out into the street, and they tar and feather him in front of everybody. And if you take a closer look at this picture, guys, Malcolm doesn't even look like a person anymore. Let me bring it a little closer for you. He looks more like a bird crossed with a horned beast, and all the while, tea is being dumped into Boston Harbor behind him. It's images like this, which was created by London publishers Robert Sayer and John Bennett, that served as a message to the English. The Americans are out to get us. They are evil creatures who delight in violence and will stand united against us to make sure that the safety of our bodies and our empire is destroyed. Now, once the Revolutionary War officially began, that did not mean that tarring and feathering was put to a halt. On the contrary, it spread even further throughout the colonies. And this time, tarring and feathering was served as a punishment towards those who would remain loyal to the British Crown. Now, in most cases, the tarring and feathering punishments were carried out as per usual. But in some cases, during the Revolutionary War, tarring and feathering did get pretty deadly, as in the case of one tarring and feather incident in Charleston, South Carolina. In 1776, a minister named John Roberts was accused of standing against the patriotic cause of the Revolutionary War and was accused of standing with the crown. And here's what happened to him. John Roberts was, quote, tarred and feathered, after which the populace, whose fury could not be appeased, erected a gibbet on which they hanged him, and afterwards made a bonfire, in which Roberts, together with the gibbet, was consumed to ashes. Yeah, it's a little extreme. And guess what? Even after the Revolutionary War, tar and feathering still sticks around in the United States. Because remember, we're Americans. We like to take things as far as they can possibly go, right? In fact, one very famous victim of tarring and feathering was a man named Joseph Smith. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it should, because Joseph Smith was the founder of Mormonism. In 1832, Smith was tarred and feathered, which apparently was so bad that, quote, they tried to force the tar paddle into my mouth. My friends spent the night in scraping and removing the tar and washing and cleansing my body so that by morning I was ready to be clothed again. In fact, if you guys take a look at the history of tarring and feathering after the Revolutionary War, you'll notice that tar and feathering was a form of punishment that was used against people that dared to stood against the status quo while under the guise of patriotism. For example, during the antebellum era in the southern United States, those that stood against slavery, those that were anti-slavery, were tarred and feathered. And then later on in the 20th century, during World War I specifically, those that stood against the war effort were also tarred and feathered. Tarring and feathering has actually even been a part of our most recent American history. In 1971, members of the KKK tarred and feathered a Michigan school principal because he was pushing for a celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. In 1981, an Alabama woman was arrested for tarring and feathering her ex-husband's new fiancé, and when she went to court and explained why she did what she did, she said that she was taking a stand for, quote, a sense of community decency, end quote. And then lastly, and most recently, in 2017, in Arizona, a monument dedicated to Confederate President Jefferson Davis was tarred and feathered. So as you can see, guys, some sense of cancel culture has been a part of our history from the very beginning. Now today, it's highly unlikely, like probably never going to happen ever, that you'll see somebody tarred and feathered and then carted through the streets of that town or city. And yet our president rails against cancel culture, yet all you have to do is look at his Twitter account to see his hypocrisy when it comes to the thing that he says he hates. Think about it. Anytime anybody bothers the president, whether they're in government, whether they're a private citizen, doesn't matter who they are, if they bother him, he will jump on Twitter and publicly shame and chastise that person, and then all the MAGA trolls on Twitter will follow suit and do the same thing. And yet, Trump is the same guy that says cancel culture is becoming a detriment and a danger to American life. Ironic, isn't it? And that is it, my friends, for this episode of US 101. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Really do appreciate it. I've actually wanted to talk about tarring and feathering for a while now. I just never knew how to really fit it as a lesson, but we've got it now, so there you go. You're welcome. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Really do appreciate it, and thanks to all of you that have subscribed to the channel, liked the videos, shared them, left comments. I can't thank you guys enough for the continued support that you give US 101. It means the world to me. As always, you can follow US 101 on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all those links down below in the description box. Guys, I'll see you next week for an all-new episode of Us 101. Until then, I am all done, and remember, everybody, wear a mask. Wear it over your nose. Make sure it covers your whole face. Because I'm getting kind of tired of this virus sticking around. So the sooner we can do this and get rid of that virus, we can all go out and live our normal, ridiculous lives that we've been living. Okay? Wear it.